Hello, this is History Literacy Ready, Unit 2, Lesson 5, and the lesson is titled Reading Primary Documents. In this lesson, students read documents about the Cuban Missile Crisis. Remember in the second lesson of this unit, they got a little taste of some of the controversy about the Cuban Missile Crisis. In the next couple of lessons, they have acquired some background information about it. And now they're getting ready to actually analyze documents. The documents are a letter from Khrushchev to Kennedy about the quarantine of Cuba, a telegram from the United States USSR ambassador to the United States about a discussion of Cuba with Robert Kennedy, and a letter from Robert Kennedy to Dean Rusk summarizing the discussion. So one issue, as you know if you have gone through the previous lessons, is that while there were missiles in Cuba pointing at the United States, there were also missiles that the United States had put into Turkey pointing to the USSR. And as you can imagine, that was an issue for the USSR. So they were trying to get some resolution to a deal that would have them remove those missiles if they were indeed going to remove the missiles from Cuba. And another issue is what the two sides say about freedom and liberty, because Khrushchev uses some arguments about liberty and freedom as he is speaking to Kennedy about the missiles in Cuba. So this is an important lesson. It's important because it actually has students engage in the practices of historians, looking at documents and trying to make sense of them in relation to the historical questions that they're asking. So one thing they're going to learn about when they do this activity, and this is the first thing they're going to learn about, is they're going to learn about the SOAPStone document analysis method. This is a method that's often used in history. It actually, I think, originated from English, but it is used often in history to help students with sourcing and thinking about that sourcing. If students have been involved in Unit 1, they will have a little practice with this. One thing I want to emphasize about SOAPStone is that it can be a meaningful activity or it can be a rather perfunctory fill-in-the-blank activity. So you want the first, not the second. It's really important that you help students see what they know about each element and how knowing about that will help them to interpret their perspective of the author, which is really what you're trying to do when you use the SOAPStone strategy. So what does it stand for? S stands for the speaker, who the author is, and what you know about that person and that person's background. For example, is the person a public figure with a known agenda or title? Is it a speech from a president? A presidential speech would have a different implication than that of a minister or an onlooker. So think about who the speaker is and what that implies in terms of the message. The O stands for occasion. What is the time and place of the document? What's going on at the time that prompted the person to write this piece? Who was the audience? To whom is the piece intended? What kind of document is this? Is it an editorial piece in a local newspaper so that local people would be reading it? Can any assumptions be made about the audience? Do you know why the document was created? What kind of language does the document contain that might tell you about who that the author is speaking to? The P stands for purpose. the purpose or meaning behind the text. What's the speaker trying to do? What kind of reaction is he hoping to get from the audience or she? S stands for subject, the topic of the document. T stands for tone, and actually that's the spelled out word tone, stands for tone. And here you're really trying to find out from the author's words the attitude of the speaker that is based upon the content of the speech. Does he or she use humor, sarcasm, irony, fear? Is that person objective? Is there bias in the language that they're using? So with all of those elements, what you're really trying to do is to get at the perspective of the author and the context in which that author is letting you know the perspective through what they have written. So students have learned about SOAPStone in Activity 1 and Activity 2. They're actually using SOAPStone to analyze 3 documents. And after they use SOAPStone to analyze those 3 documents that we talked about at first, they're going to discuss their interpretations of the SOAPStone activity. So as they do the SOAPStone activity with the 3 documents, you need to know that the documents actually differ in their perspective on the Cuban Missile Crisis. So SOAPStone then is that way you're going to get them to analyze that perspective. I would, as I usually suggest, have students work in pairs to use the SOAPStone method, to talk in pairs before they talk to the whole group. You might have to, if students have not had any practice using SOAPStone or have not been introduced to SOAPStone in the past, you might have to do some modeling and some whole group use of the SOAPStone method before they're put into pairs. But what you want students to do is to be able to use SOAPStone fairly independently, but with support. And that support comes from the pair, and then it comes from the whole group feedback that you are getting when they're finished discussing SOAPStone in the pairs. In Activity 3, students are going to actually read and annotate the documents. They're going to talk through their annotations in pairs or small groups. They're going to engage in a whole class discussion of their interpretation of the text. They're going to answer a set of targeted questions if these topics did not come up or were not to your satisfaction in the whole class discussion. And you're going to discuss the tone and purpose of the documents now that they've been read. It's a little hard to tell the tone in SOAPStone and the purpose in SOAPStone if you're just doing a rudimentary kind of pre-reading of the document ahead of time. So actually reading the document helps you have a little deeper answer to tone and purpose questions. And you're going to, the students are going to decide how trustworthy the documents are given the information that they now have. So as I've said before, when you open up a discussion to the whole group and they've already talked in pairs or small groups before they get to that whole class discussion, you want to have a rather open-ended discussion of what they talked about. So I wouldn't try to ask questions at this point except for very general ones. Like, what did you discover about the documents? What did you notice? What are some of the things that you can tell us about your talk with your partner? That kind of thing. And see what comes up. So before you have done this lesson, you should have read the extra questions on the teacher's guide that are on page 123 and 4. And you can kind of tell by students' discussion whether they're really digging deep into the questions that are part of the ones that are provided. If they did, and if you're satisfied with the answers, then you don't have to actually ask those questions. But if they didn't, or if the discussion needs more depth, you can ask the questions provided and use the suggested parts of the text to help students compare and contrast the documents as they go through. So in activity 4, they're working on vocabulary, and they're working on vocabulary in the same way that they have done in the past. I want to say that the first bullet there, interpret general academic vocabulary in sentences, can be done earlier on if when students are in pairs and they're reading and annotating the text, they are experiencing a great deal of difficulty with general academic vocabulary. You could even, if students are having difficulty with one particular word, for instance, you can stop as they're reading and engage in a discussion of the word meanings with the class. I wouldn't pre-teach this vocabulary because you should have emphasized before reading that what they're going to be doing is to figure out those words, try to figure out those words that they do not know on their own by looking at the context, by trying to break the word down, by asking partners, by using any sort of background knowledge they have, or by, if they need to, by asking you. But there may be some things that they still can't get. And you're going to, at that point where they need that help, you're going to provide that support. So it could be while they're actually doing the reading. It could be as soon as they are done. You want to pull them back and say, okay, what words were you struggling with? And then give them a little more time to process the text. Or you can wait till after you've had the discussion if you feel like most of the words were fairly well known, but they just need some, maybe a little more study. And the next thing they do is talk through the discipline-specific vocabulary. So to reiterate, before they actually read, remind them about the ways of resolving the meanings of general vocabulary words they don't know, and at this point they should know those ways. And engage in the activity when it's at the best point for it to help them understand the text. The talk through is one of those standard procedures students are using throughout Unit 2 to review the information they've just read. It'll help them recall the information as they continue to read. And so what you're doing, to remind you, with the talk through is students are sitting in pairs and they're going through the list of discipline-specific words, and you can narrow these any way you want to. And one person is the listener, the other person is the talker. So the person who is doing the talking is telling you everything, telling the partner everything that they know at this point about that term. The partner is listening to that with the documents and everything in front of them. The talker is doing it without that information. In other words, they're just doing it from memory. So the person who's listening is listening for accuracy, listening for thoroughness, making sure that everything they said is what they have read, and when there's difficulty, that listener can stop the person and have them go and look at the text for a little bit and then come back and say it from memory again. When they finish that word, then they switch roles. So that vocabulary, talk-through vocabulary activity is the one that ends this lesson. And as a lesson, I think with the documents, it's going to be very interesting to them to see what was written at the time. There is a little bit of controversy there that you will discover, so students should have fun with it.